Hi, this is Allison Backus Troy with The Shared World, which is my YouTube channel about the humanities in real life and everyday life. Some of you who are watching this are people who are new to my channel and to my Facebook page. I've gotten a few new followers trickling in, and so I welcome you. I'm really glad that you're following me, and I hope that what I offer to you is something that is bright and illuminating as you go about your life. Here in Houston, it is still hot. It's supposed to cool down this week. It's about 10 degrees cooler than it was last week, but it's still in the 80s. So I am still eager. I've got like my fall sweater, but I'm inside. It's supposed to cool down, but it's still hot here. So wherever you are in the country, I hope that fall is cooler for you and beautiful. What I'm doing today in this video is the second installment of my fall poetry series, where I just read poems about autumn and about fall. The last poem that I did in my last video was Elizabeth Alexander's Equinox, which is a very stark but illuminating poem meditating on the death of bees and also the death of her grandmother. The poet that I want to introduce you to today is a poet who tends more toward, I don't want to say the positive, because I think that is just a lame thing to say, and I think that this poet would disagree with that. This poet is Richard Wilbur, who is a really famous 20th century American lyrical poet. He was the second poet laureate of the country, which is a really big honor. And what I really love about his work is, I read some of his poems in one of those Norton anthologies when I was in college, and there's just something so simple but full in his descriptions and in the natural landscape that he describes for us. He really is like a nature poet, and spends a lot of his poetry really examining nature, but he does it in such a way as to really just kind of bring you into the wonder and the awe that he feels at any given moment as he's, writing about whatever. And I think that is just a really powerful mark of who he was as a poet. What I wanted to do before reading the poem is that I wanted to give you a brief introduction just from the Poetry Foundation. The Poetry Foundation is giant. If you're looking for places to learn more about poetry and to discover other poets and to find different kinds of media when it comes to hearing poems, mixed media things with poems, if you're a teacher, if you are leading small groups of any kind, if you're a writer yourself, it's like a benchmark is the Poetry Foundation. I was really lucky growing up outside Chicago, which is where the Poetry Foundation is centered. I got to go to events for the Poetry Center quite often. So I got to go see W.S. Merwin, who is an unspeakably giant poet, give a reading thanks to the Poetry Foundation. So, and you can find them on Facebook. You could, they're all over the place. So I wanted to give you this introduction to who Wilbur was and a little bit of his kind of poetic philosophy, and then to give you this poem from his third book of poems. And the poem is called The Beautiful Changes. But first, a little bit about his background. Okay, so where I want to start is, Wilbur was alive and young, like a young man right before World War II, and he fought in World War II. And like all poets facing war and crisis, that giant war faced him. And this is directly from the Poetry Foundation website. He described the influence of his experiences in war on his poetry. Quote, "One does not use poetry for its major purposes as a means to organize oneself and the world until one's world somehow gets out of hand." And so you really see in his own his own kind of like poetic philosophy that, you know, he didn't want to be this really sentimental poet. He didn't want to just be like, oh, everything is so beautiful and look at all of the beautiful forms I'm gonna pay attention to. You know, he didn't want to use poetry to just make himself feel better. It wasn't therapeutic in that sense. But until his world was disordered by World War II, having that experience helped him to see the foundation of his own poetry making as something that could reorder the world for him. And so he is really interested in like forms and shapes and like I said, the natural world. He got some criticism for that. People really kind of thought like that his poetry was, you know, just really bare and like not interesting. But for him, even though he was accused of sacrificing emotion in his poetry, there is a lot of life and noticing that is in the images that he uncovers. And I just wanted to read you this other quote. Wilbur himself dismissed the notion that being a poet of praise, a poet who noticed the world and paid attention to the good things about it, a poet of praise and not complaint is a matter of running from reality. I feel that the universe is full of glorious energy, he explained in an interview with the Paris Review a long time ago, that the energy tends to take pattern and shape, and that the ultimate character of things is comely and good. I am perfectly aware that I say this in the teeth of all sorts of contrary evidence, that I must be basing it partly on temperament and partly on faith, but that's my attitude. And what I love about that is that I think that in poetry, you get, I mean, you just get so much garbage. You know, you get so much sentimental garbage that people, you know, they're trying to express some deeper feeling, but they don't know how to interact with the bare elements of language and description in a way to really make that feeling be palpable. And so you get a lot of just garbage, and it's not because people don't know how to write poetry, and people don't know how to read poetry. It's just that it's really, really challenging to write about the physical world in such a way that you know, it not only comes alive and is descriptive, but that you see some deeper meaning in it. And I think that in this poem, The Beautiful Changes, which is an autumn poem by Richard Wilbur, you hear him do that so well. You hear him say something about the wonder and the beauty of the world in a way that's not saccharine, in a way that's not dumbed down, in a way that doesn't belong on a greeting card, but in a way that really elevates what's around him, which is a very typical, generic fall day. Okay, so the best thing to do is to read it. So this is The Beautiful Changes by Richard Wilbur. One wading a fall meadow finds on all sides the Queen Anne's lace lying like lilies on water. It glides so far from the walker, it turns dry grass to a lake, as the slightest shade of you valleys my mind in fabulous blue lucerne. The beautiful changes as a forest is changed by a chameleon's tuning his skin to it, as a mantis arranged on a green leaf grows into it, makes the leaf leafier, and proves any greenness is deeper than anyone knows. Your hands hold roses always in a way that says they are not only yours. The beautiful changes in such kind ways, wishing ever to sunder things and things selves for a second finding, to lose for a moment all that it touches back to wonder. I'm going to read that poem again because I think that there's so much in this poem that's like, you know, it's like touching the surface of water and breaking the water tension. You know, the images and the repetition of the beautiful changes. And even as I was reading it, you know, I thought the beautiful changes, like beautiful and changes were different parts of speech. Like, I thought beautiful was describing changes, it changes as a noun, but really in the poem, as I'm reading it, the beautiful is the noun, the beautiful is the subject, and changes is the verb. So even in reading that, like, I discovered that, and that's really profound. So I want to read it again. The beautiful changes. It'll probably change the way that I phrase that now that I've picked up on it. One wading a fall meadow finds on all sides the Queen Anne's lace lying like lilies on water. It glides so from the walker, it turns dry grass to a lake. As the slightest shade of you valleys my mind in fabulous blue lucerne. The beautiful changes as a forest is changed by a chameleon's tuning his skin to it, as a mantis arranged on a green leaf grows into it, makes the leaf leafier, improves any greenness is deeper than anyone knows. Your hands hold roses always in a way that says they are not only yours. The beautiful changes in such kind ways, wishing ever to sunder things and things' selves for a second finding, to lose for a moment all that it touches, back to wonder. I love this poem. I love this. And I love like this moment of like, saying it and realizing like, oh, this means something different than how I originally read it, and that turns the whole poem for me. I think a lot of people struggle when it comes to reading poetry, particularly, lyric poetry like this, where, it's just in verse. There's not a real, like, rhyme scheme to it. There's not, any sort of like formal meter. Even though people have problems reading formal meter, I think sometimes people are like, well, I don't really know how to read this. A couple of resources that I think are really helpful, aside like what you're going to see in the Poetry Foundation, are my friend Tanya Runyon has a really great book called How to Read a Poem, that if you go to, if you just Google Tanya Runyon, How to Read a Poem, her book will come up, and that's just a really wonderful introduction to like how to listen to sound and how to, look at images and, to do the thing that I just did where you're reading something, you're like, oh, it means something different. Another really great book, and this is probably my favorite Mary Oliver collection, is that Mary Oliver has a book called like The Poet's Handbook. And what I really love about this handbook is that it really breaks down these different things that you listen for in poetry in ways that are, really related to, like, obviously the traditions of writing poetry and the tools of poetry, but in a very natural way. Like, you're being really taught like how to listen for different kinds of sound. You're being taught how to beat out meter. And I remember when I was teaching, I would hand out clips from it, because I just thought it was such a wonderful introduction to how you begin reading poetry. And for a lot of people, like, poetry beckons to you and it calls out to you and you're like, oh, I want to read it. And then you're like, I'm lost. And it's not meant to be lost in a way where you can't get out and you don't know where you are. It's meant to hold you fast and instruct you and illuminate you and confuse you to the point of like being brought to re-examine yourself and to re-examine the image and the idea that is present in the poem. So I will have a link for this poem underneath this video so that you can look at it. The Poetry Foundation has a really great series of autumn poems that you can look at. And as the season continues to go on, I will continue to find poems for us that celebrate this wonderful season. I hope that you're doing well and that you stay well, and that as the end of this wonderful poem states, that you are able to touch back to wonder.